Hey, everybody, welcome to the show this week. I've got another treat for you. I got Captain Matt Budd, who may know as much about pompano fishing as anybody that I've ever talked to. Probably pretty sure that he does. He's going to give us a How To Tuesday today on how to catch pompano. And this is a guy that's doing it not just recreationally, but also commercially. And when you do it commercially, you tend to learn a few things that the recreational angler that might escape the recreational angler. So, Matt, what about the pompano? What is it that makes the pompano so highly prized in some instances, and then more importantly, how do you catch them?
Okay. The Pompano has exploded in the last few years. The price has skyrocketed. There's a high demand for them. They've almost got it. I describe it as a buttery flavored meat. It's high in omegas. It spoils pretty quickly, but it's just it's a delicacy. It's great eating. I don't know if you've had it, Tom, but
Yeah, for sure.
it's great. I wouldn't recommend keeping it a few days in the fridge. You got to eat it the first day, second day, and then it gets a strong taste to it. But as far as catching them, I don't really think they're too much different than jacks in the way they act and the behavior they have. Um, we do two ways. If they're real active and we find them skipping, which skipping is almost like, I don't know if anyone's ever seen one jump, but they jump and they skip on their sides as if someone took a flat rock and threw it. Have you
Right.
seen that one before?
Yes, I have seen that.
And that's how you know they're around. They give themselves away that way. Sometimes they don't skip. Sometimes they just kind of cruise under the surface. They're real spooky fish. So they'll cruise under the surface away from your boat. But when you get them located and you know you're in those fish, a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll throw a goofy jig. Doc's goofy jig.
Mm-hmm.
There's Gulfstream. There's all different companies that make them. They all work. And I've done experimenting with the colors. It almost seems like anything bright works. They love pink, yellow, green. That chartreuse color. Any of those hot colors they really like. Um, that is a great thing when they're very active. When they're not active, those fish can be there and they won't touch that jig. Sometimes you got to anchor up if you're in the boat, or if you're fishing from land, you fish that bait. Sand fleas, clams, and a really useful tool I've used lately is fish bites.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a company and they make it's like an artificial bait and it's got mesh on the inside. So you put your sand flea on it, then you put a piece of that fish bite, and they make it in sand flea um, flavors, if you want to call it a flavor.
Yeah.
They make in sand flea, squid, shrimp, clam. They've got all the flavors, and it just adds, a different. I don't know. They come in bright colors, and you put a little stripper there, and it's made a huge difference in my pompano fishing.
So can you catch them with just the fish bites and not the sand flea? Like there's probably tons of times where the sand flea comes off and you still got the fish bites on there. But is
Exactly.
that something that you do? Like
There's
just
been
fish
times
bites?
where there's been times, Tom, where I've gone out and I'm like, man, these pompano are everywhere, and I didn't have fleas with me because you don't want to bring sand fleas on the boat every single day, and if the fish aren't around, you don't expect them. But that the fish bites hold in your boat well. They're in a little Ziploc bag almost, and they'll stay for a year.
Hmm.
So I'll keep that in the boat. And there's times where I don't have the sand fleas and the pompanos around, and you fish just the fish bites, and they eat it. They eat it.
And so that's like on a little jig head or on the Doc's Goofy jig you put it
You
on
can
there, or how do you do it?
Either way, if they're finicky on the jig, sometimes you put a little tiny strip of it on the jig, or you can put it on your traditional pompano rig with the floats and beads and just
Mm-hmm.
use that as the bait.
So let's talk about a traditional pompano rig. Tell me, because we don't do as much pompano fishing as in the Keys as certainly as you do up there. But the pompano is such a widely spread fish. So many people fish for them. Go over the traditional rig if you would.
The traditional rig it's almost like a what you might call a chicken rig. I don't know what that knot's called. I'm not where you it's a tricky little knot, but it's basically like a tree. You've
Mm-hmm.
got your lead on the bottom and you've got a little tree line that comes out, and then another little tree line. You can do 2, you can do 3. And you're going to have, on those tree lines, you're going to have either a bobber, a small bobber. They call it like a pompano float. And that keeps it off the bottom so the crabs don't eat your bait. Or some guys prefer beads with those floats, or they don't use anything. But then you got to deal with the crabs. You want that little tiny float on there because it keeps your bait up off the bottom when there's slack in the line. And they're usually bright colors because the pompano, for some reason, like those bright colors. It just attracts them. I've had times where I was running out of bait and I casted it out, and I only baited 2 of my 3 hooks, and they ate just the float. I caught it on the one with the float.
Wow.
No bait.
That's cool. That's cool.
So that rig's pretty simple. It's just, lead on the bottom, 2 to 3 hooks up on those tree lines, and then a swivel.
And so I guess if you could probably tie a blood knot right there and just leave one long end, right, for that tree knot. I mean, I don't know what the knot is that you're talking about, but it would be similar to that, like a blood knot with a long end off of one side.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it's a fairly simple rig. I mean, it's really effective. And the only thing I could stress with that is, with water clarity, you want to adjust your leaders. There's a fine line between going too light, because if you get a big pompano or you get 2, what's going to happen if your leader's too light? It's going to break it.
Yeah, they're pulling against one another too. That's a problem.
Pompano, they're like permit. They're finicky fish. There's a certain recipe for those fish that they want, and sometimes they want it up current, sometimes they want it down current, sometimes they want it upwind but not down current. You got to figure out what's going on and how they want it before you can crack that code.
And then for the beach fishermen, you see a lot of people, very into pompano fishing from the beach. Seems like a really fun thing to do. You can get some dinner. How important is it to have ice with you when you're catching those fish? Like you said that they spoil badly, and there's other fish, and you're a commercial fisherman, so I'd love to hear your perspective on this. But there's other fish that it's so important to get those fish on ice immediately, and other fish do okay without it, immediately. I mean, it's super important to get them on ice, but there's some fish that are really, really ice dependent. Like the faster you get them on, the better they're going to taste. I would imagine that's the case with pompano, but I don't know. What is the deal with the ice? Like if you're a beach fisherman, you walk way down the beach. Should you be prepared with some ice?
It just depends. A lot of those guys bring rolling coolers with a bag of ice. If you don't have a bag of ice, the best thing to do is keep that 5-gallon bucket that you carried most of your tackle out in, keep it in water. And if you get 3 or 4 pompano, you fill that with water and you try and keep them alive for as long as possible, just to keep them fresh, because you don't want to throw them out in the sand and it's 80 degrees out and they're baking in the sun. With that high oil content, they're going to spoil very quickly.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Okay, cool. All right, so that's Pompano Fishing 101. What's if you take it to the next level, what's going just a little bit beyond 101?
Well, going beyond 101 would be, like I said, lighter leaders. If you want to get those goofy jigs, you can get a fly vise at home, and we make what's called quills. Maybe like a number 1 hook and some bucktail or some hair of some kind, and make short little flies. You can add flash to it if you want, and you add those flies on a loop knot that is attached to your goofy jig. So while it falls, those quills come up above the goofy jig, and those pompanos will hit that instead of the jig a lot of the time on those tricky days.
Interesting.
And those quills make a huge difference sometimes.
Wow.
And sometimes they don't, but that's definitely a more advanced thing, because you can't really find them everywhere, and I prefer to tie them myself.
Yeah, and so what size hook is that on that little quill?
I use either a number 1 or a number 2, and what I'll do is I'll get either pink or a bright colored either bucktail, or I'll use the nylon hair, and just real small. I trim them so that you're just trimming that hair right behind the tail end of the hook there. You don't want it too long, and you don't want it weighing down your jig too much so that it affects the performance of the jig.
And then do you trim it like when you use the synthetic hair? Do you try to make it look like bucktail, like, or do you trim it like a sharp just trim, like take the scissors and just cut it,
I just cut it straight.
Straight across,
I just straight cut it right behind, and sometimes I'll add some of the crystal flash to it. It all depends. You get into those pompano, a lot of time you're going to get into ladyfish and bluefish because they pretty much hang together and they like the same water temperatures. So sometimes using that quill, though, might get you into trouble with those ladyfish or bluefish because it can be a nightmare getting them off the hooks, and having that extra hook just adds a whole different level of danger to dealing with a shaking ladyfish.
Yeah, good tip. Good tip. Stay away from a shaking ladyfish and all the different hooks. All right, well that's cool, man. That's Pompano Fishing 101 and 102. The quill thing. That's a good tip right there. That one will catch you a lot more fish. I'm sure that it will, especially when it's a little bit tough on some days. All right, man. Matt, thank you for the How To Tuesday, how to catch pompano. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
If they want to get in touch with you, how do they do it?
They can find me on my YouTube, Captain Matt Bud, or they can find me on my Instagram, Captain Matt Bud, or they can find me on my website, JupiterFishingAcademy.com.
All right. Thanks. Until next week, we'll see you.